This is part 2 of our discussion of myths around the purpose and practice of process management and improvement. We covered 3 common myths in part 1, and we'll discuss another 4 in this video. It's as well to deal with myths before they gain traction and become a major roadblock. Forewarned is forearmed. Myths are imaginary, but their impact can be very real. Let's explore that a little more. Hi, I'm down here, back in the myths file, looking for some more to bust. These myths around process can become reasons, excuses, for not doing anything about process management and improvement. Let's bust a few more of those myths. So here's the list we're working on in these 2 videos, and we'll finish it today in this part 2. So we dealt with the first 3 in part 1, and now we'll look at these 4 myths in this video. We're too dynamic to define processes. We want innovation, not improvement. Too busy transforming, we've got no time for process, and process is not strategic. Let's have a look at each of those in turn. Have you experienced this, perhaps even in your own organization? I get it often enough as a consultant going into new organizations where people will say, oh, we're very dynamic and we're creative and we're doing things and we do it differently and stuff's changing all the time and we couldn't possibly document processes. We couldn't even define processes. We don't have processes. Well, that's not true. Certainly not in the way I understand process. And the test of that is I simply say, so when someone new starts here, what do? Do you sort of just say, here's your desk, good luck? Do whatever you like? No, of course they don't. So everyone has some process, lots of process. And it's the way we get things done in every organization. It doesn't matter how creative you are or how different you are, how unique you are, there are processes for getting things done. Now, you might need to detail some processes in a lot less detail than others. And maybe some processes, create good idea. That's going to be hard to model at all. But we do need to know what happens before and we need to know what happens afterwards. So there is no organization that is just, so amorphous and creative and flexible and dynamic that it has no processes. That's just to understand process in the worst possible way. And it does happen. We started a project once with a CEO briefing, and 5 minutes in, he said, hang on, I'm not trying to improve processes, I want to get rid of them. Great way to start a project. But we knew, vaguely what he meant, but we had to track back a bit and reestablish what we meant by process, etc. So too dynamic to define processes is busted. Here's the next one. Again, another CEO story. It's literally true, I started a 5-day training course on process improvement, and we had the CEO in to give a 10-minute rah-rah speech at the kickoff. And she'd been well briefed, but as is the wont of some CEOs, put the briefing aside. And after saying good morning, this member, start of 5 days of process improvement training course, after saying good morning, the next words out of her mouth were, I don't want improvement, I want innovation. So I'm thinking, well, this is going to be a long course or perhaps a very short course because it was all about improvement. Now we know what she meant. What she meant was she didn't want people messing about, wasting time improving processes that nobody cared about. And we can do that. We can spend a lot of time doing that, but it's not the best use of our time. So she wanted big changes to important processes. And in my life as a consultant, that's commonly what we're asked. People want to make radical change to mission critical processes because that's where the benefit is. So we don't want to be wasting time improving processes that don't matter, of course. But that's not to say that we don't want improvement. We only want innovation. It's a spectrum, isn't it? It's big change and small change, either end of the spectrum, and we need to be working across that spectrum on a regular basis. So forget improvement. We only want innovation. Busted. It would be very tiring if nothing else. Have you had this experience that what organizations will say is that, well, we've got the big project going on at the moment, and so many organizations have the transformation project happening. And as soon as the transformation project is over, then we'll have time to look at processes. Well, whatever else you're transforming in that process, you're making big changes to processes. So saying we'll run a project that will make big changes to processes and then we'll try and understand those processes seems to me to be the wrong way around, surely. Surely we need to do it in the other order. And it's commonly the case that when we're doing process work and we're trying to build process maturity and building process architectures, etc., getting the circles turning, if you've seen that video, when we're doing that, organizations have big things happening. They often do. Well, the process-based management development project needs to coexist, and perhaps it's running in parallel with those other big projects. And at some point, you want to get ahead of the big projects and now be the driver for projects and not the follower. So we need to be able to do that, but we can't keep putting it off. There won't be a time when you don't have a big project going. So too busy transforming, busted. We can't be too busy. We've got to make the time, and then we get ahead and be the process-based management leading the change, not following the change. And here's our last one, and maybe this is the most important in a sense, because this is the thing that stops executive engagement. Because process work is seen to be something that happens at the counter, on the phone, in the cubicle, out in the field. It's this kind of low-level activity, which is important. People acknowledge it's important, of course. It's the sharp end. It's where it happens. But it's not strategic because it's a long way from the executive level. Well, I think that's a misunderstanding of process. And also it says something about the way in which process thinking has been developed in the organization. So I think in developing a process architecture, that description of the hierarchy of processes through which you deliver value, I think in doing that, the starting point is strategy. Because we know that it's through those cross-functional processes that we execute strategy. And certainly in any architecture that I'm involved in building, there is a direct line of sight from every process back to the strategy. We've structured the whole process architecture, the whole set of processes to respond to the strategy and to execute the strategy. So of course it's strategic. It's how we're executing strategy. And I think you miss executive engagement when you don't make that point. But it's not that hard to make, you know. We just ask people, how does work get done? It gets done across the organization. How do we execute strategy? Well, someone does this, someone does this, someone does this. They're describing processes, even if they don't have that language. So, process not strategic, busted. So, we busted 7 processes, I hope you'll agree. We started out with 3 in the first video, and now we're dealing with this too dynamic to define our processes. No such organisation. We want innovation, not improvement. No, we need both. It's a spectrum. We're too busy transforming. Well, that may not end well, because whatever else you're transforming, you're making radical changes to processes. And if you're doing that and just hoping it's going to work, well, you know what they say, hope is not a strategy. Process is not strategic, that's just plain wrong. Process is strategic. It's the way in which we execute strategy. The only way we can execute strategy. It's not a choice. The only choice is whether we're actually going to do it consciously and mindfully, or just let it go, let it rip and hope it all comes together on the day. So we've dealt now with 7 common myths, and you'll have other myths in your organization, just maybe particular to your organization, something about the history of process in the organization or the people that are there. There'll be something peculiar to your organization, and I think it's really important that we uncover and talk about, address those myths, because if we let them rip, they're actually going to have a great deal of trouble for us. They're going to stop us doing good process management, which leads to good process improvement to give us organizational performance improvement. So it's fundamental that we address those myths, we find them, address them, and continue to look for them and deal with them as new ones arise. So I think it's very important, because those myths can have a fundamentally road-blocking effect on all of our process work. They can stop it dead. Let's get out there and find those myths and bust them.